Thanks, Felicia. Welcome everyone to our hand knit heart pillow class. This is the heart pillow that we're going to be making today. And really, it doesn't take a lot of materials, which is an awesome thing, and it doesn't take too much time. I honestly think you'll be able to finish this heart knit pillow today in about an hour and a half. We have an hour together in class, so I have a little bit of movie magic at the end, but if we are able to go at a quicker pace, then we might be able to do the whole entire heart together. But I will definitely leave you with everything you need to know in order to create your own hand knit heart. So even if you have never hand knit it before, this is definitely a class for you. If you've hand knit it before, even better, you might be able to finish a couple of pillows during our class time. So you only need one skein of yarn in order to create this pillow. So one skein of yarn, some polyfill to stuff the pillow with, and also scissors. Those are the only three things that you're going to need. Now, bonuses are I have a PDF of my little handwritten pattern that I put together for everyone. So Felicia just put into the chat this particular handout. I will be showing it during the class and we can be following along together. It's written in a very elementary way because if you've never done this before, if you're not sure how to follow patterns, it's a pretty easy pattern for just about anybody, especially beginners, to follow. So it doesn't have any confusing knitting language that you may or may not know already. So these are things that we're going to go over together. And then, like I said, you can really get into this. It only takes about an hour and a half, so you can make a ton of these as gifts and presents. It sits so nicely on a table or on a chair, a rocking chair to set it up. It's a really huggable gift that maybe if you have a college-aged kid, you can kind of give it to them as a hug that if they get lonely or miss their family, they can hug this beautiful pillow. So we're going to be doing the hand knitting together. Go ahead, Felicia, and flip it over for me to my other camera. This is the pillow once again. You see all these beautiful stitches that make these like V formations. Those are what we call knit stitches. So we're going to learn how to do those with our yarn and with just our fingers, no needles, no hooks, nothing like that. And this is what the pattern that I've created looks like. So this particular pattern is in a link in the chat that you're welcome to open up. You can save it and you can print it out later. I will be showing it as we go so that you'll know kind of where we are in the pattern and what all of these things mean. This is also posted in a post on my personal Instagram, which is the number 4M Coleman. And so you can go there and check it out. Also, if you get stuck at a couple of the beginning steps, like the things with doing slip knots and the basic chains, I have a couple of stories that are saved in my highlights on 4M Coleman that you can click through and see those over and over again in case that's the spot that you're getting stuck. So today we are going to get started with our hand knit pillow. And on the pattern, it says to chain one. So to begin almost any knitting or crochet project, we tend to do something called a slip stitch or a slip knot. Let me talk about the yarn. The yarn I'm going to be using is the Bernat Blanket Big. It comes in a ton of different colors. There's some of these that are variegated, which means that the color changes throughout the yarn skein. You can also get this in a ton of different solids. So feel free to find whatever it is that you want to fit. I have this really beautiful purple that I'm working with today. You've seen the burgundy heart that was on the sign up for this class. I made some hearts out of different sizes of yarn. So if you get a smaller chunky yarn, you can just make a smaller version of this pillow. You can do two tones, you can do one tone. You only need one color and one skein to do both sides and we'll sew it together. But if you want to use two skeins to give it two different sides, you can do that also. So here's my skein of yarn and I'm going to find the piece and we're going to start with something called a slip knot. So the way that I like to do my slip knot with this big old chunky yarn is to point my fingers towards my belly. So I kind of hook my fingers and point them towards my belly. And then I'm going to take what's called the tail, the end of the yarn, and drape it over the right-hand side. And then on the left-hand side is going to be what we call the working yarn, and it's still attached to my big ball of yarn, my skein. So I have draped over my fingers, and I'll do this a couple times. And then I'm going to use my left hand to grab both the tail and the working yarn while it's still attached to my fingers. And I'm going to twist my wrist. So my fingers are pointing at my belly, and I'm going to twist away from myself. And the point of that is so that this yarn can cross over top of itself. And then I'm going to be taking the pincher fingers that are in there, and I'm going to be grabbing onto the working yarn. So there's the tail and there's the working yarn. I'm going to grab onto the working yarn and pull it, and I'm pulling on the tail and I'm pulling on the working yarn, and I've made this little loop, and this little loop can slip up and down this yarn, making it a big loop and making it a very small loop, and that's what makes it a slip knot. So I'll definitely show that again. My fingers are towards my belly. I'm draping the yarn over my fingers. Here's my tail on the right-hand side. Here's my working yarn on the left side. I'm grabbing it with my other hand, and I'm twisting my wrist. So my fingers are pointing towards me. Now my fingers are pointing away from me. I'm taking these pincher fingers and I'm grabbing the working yarn and pulling the working yarn through that loop. And that has just made our slip stitch. If this is something that you're getting stuck on, then remember that Felicia put into the chat 4M Coleman is my personal Instagram, and it has this tutorial over and over again that you can watch this video until you get it with that slip knot. One last time, and then we're going to move on to our chain. I draped fingers towards my belly. I draped the yarn. On the right-hand side is my tail. Left-hand side is my working yarn. Hold on to it with your other hand. Twist your wrist around, use your pinchers and grab the yarn and pull through. Now, because this slip knot slips up and down and makes a very large loop or a very small loop, make your loop so that it fits about 4 fingers. So tighten it up so that you have about 4 fingers of width. That's about how big you want your loop to be. If you want to do a little tighter stitch, you can make it just 3 fingers, but I think 4 is a good place to start. And then we're going to do our first hand knit stitch, which is called a chain stitch. And the way you're going to do a chain stitch is you're going to take the pincher fingers and you're going to grab the working yarn and you're going to pull it through that loop. And you've just made a chain. Here's your slip knot. Pinch your fingers through, grab one piece of the working yarn, pull it through, and you have this V formation, and this is what we call a chain stitch. So we're going to start this pillow with 1 chain, and then on our pattern, it says that we're going to chain 1. We just did that. And then it's going to say we increase to 2. So what we're doing is we're building out this yellow portion of the heart pattern right now. So we're at the 1, we're at the point. Now we're going to increase it to 2, and we're going to keep increasing the heart to make that shape fan out. And then obviously we're going to go over and do the top 2 humps. So this is what I call the pretzel when I'm doing this increase. So I have my chain 1, and then I'm going to pull 1 more chain through that. So now I have a chain of 3. So all I did was with this new loop, I put my pinchers in, grabbed some working yarn and pulled it through. But I want this to be 2 stitches, not just 1. So the way I'm going to make this into 2 stitches is what I call the pretzel. So we pulled this stitch up. So in the same hole, in the same stitch, I'm going to push a stitch backwards. And this is what makes that pretzel shape I'm referring to. I'll show this again. This is the pretzel. So when I go back, and if I'm just all the way back to my slip knot, I pull some working yarn. That's me chaining 1. And now the next step on the direction says to increase to 2. So I pull 1 chain, and then right next to it in that same spot, I'm going to push 1 back. So I pulled 1 loop forward and I pushed 1 loop back, and that's what made this kind of pretzel shape right here. So this increasing part, I think, is one of the trickiest parts of this pillow, But then once you get used to it, this is all we're going to keep doing over and over again. All right, I'm going to flip this over. So I have chained 1, I increased to 2, which was my pretzel. Now I'm going to flip over my work and I'm going to stitch 2. So when I flip over my work, the pretzel is up here, and notice how my working yarn is going down towards the table. If you have not flipped over your work, notice how my working yarn is coming up and out towards me. So flip it so that your working yarn is going down, and then we're going to stitch 2. And anytime it says to stitch, it just means pull a loop up through the stitches you already have. So we have 2 loops from the pretzel. I'm going to pull up 1 stitch here, and I'm using my working yarn to kind of guide the direction I'm going with my yarn. And then I'm going to pull a loop up through this one. So what I've done so far, and you can let me know how you're doing, is I chained 1, I increased to 2, making a pretzel. I flipped my piece so that the working yarn is going down, and then I pulled a stitch through each one of those 2 loops of the pretzel, and that is me at the step that says stitch 2. Now I'm going to increase to 4. So I have 2 loops, and you can imagine that if I increase to 4, I'm going to need 2 coming out of this one and 2 coming out of this one to get us up to 4. So I'm going to put a pretzel in here, and I'm going to put a pretzel in here. But before I go to that, I am going to repeat that pretzel one more time. And then I promise we'll keep going. If you feel like you can kind of go ahead with the pattern, feel free, but I'm going to help a couple people with the pretzel one more time. So here's my slip knot. I'm pulling 1 chain through. That's my chain 1. And now that I have this chain 1, I'm going to pull 1 more, and that's half of the pretzel. And then since I pulled up and over, to do it backwards, you're going to go push down and through. And the reason why I'm calling it a pretzel is because it gets a little twisty up here, because you fit 2 stitches into that same one. It's almost like an elephant. So this is the pretzel. You got 2 stitches into that 1 chain. And now the working yarn, I want you to have it down towards the table instead of up towards you. So flip it down towards the table. Now you have these beautiful 2 stitches. So you're going to pull a loop through this one, and you're going to pull a loop through this one. And now you're about to be on the step where we're going to increase to 4. So the stitches, if you measured with 4 fingers at the beginning, each one of your stitches should be about that same amount in order to kind of keep them even. And the more you practice, the more you do this, the better your stitches will be for sure. So you don't have to leave them super loose, but however many fingers you use, kind of keep using that as a guide to check yourself. Okay, now we're at the step where we are going to increase to 4, which means we're going to put a pretzel in each one of these. So here is my pretzel. My guide yarn, my working yarn is going down towards my table. Here's my extra working yarn, and since I'm about to work in this direction, I'm kind of telling my working yarn this is the way I'm going. And here is us about to increase to 4. So I'm going to pull a pretzel out of this one. First, a regular stitch, just a normal loop. But then to fit the second loop, I have to push it. So in that same blank space where I pulled that one, I need to push 1 backwards. And now I have 2 loops instead of just 1. Now in the next space over here, I'm going to pull up 1 stitch. And in that same space, I'm going to push back 1 stitch. And now we should be able to see 4 different loops. And we have increased our size to 4. So you make a pretzel and make another pretzel in those 2 stitches. And now we have 4 loops. And basically what we're going to do is every time we go from right to left, we're going to increase our stitches. And every time we go from right to left, we are going to just stitch each one of those. So be patient with yourself. And we are putting this video up today. So as soon as we finish the class today, we're going to put this video on. So if this is going too fast, you'll definitely have an opportunity still today to be able to go ahead and catch up and figure out, you just might need to see it one more time or see it in a different way. So now that we have increased to 4, we're going to kind of lock those in by stitching all 4 of those. And notice the arrow on my pattern is saying that every time after we increase going from right to left, we're going to lock those in by stitching them going the other way. So I have 4 loops and my working yarn is going this direction. So I'm going to reach in with my pinchers and grab a loop through each one of these 4 stitches. There we go. And now I'm going to take these 4 stitches and I'm going to increase to 6. So if I'm increasing to 6, that means I'm only going to make a pretzel on the outside 2, and the 2 in the middle are going to be normal. So in order to get from 4 to 6, I need 2 more loops. I need a pretzel right here on the first one and a pretzel on the last one, and everything else stays the same. We will kind of build out this heart together, and then those of you who might be lost or a little bit frustrated, I am going to come back and help you, but I'm going to get pretty far into the heart before I come back. All right, here we go. I'm going this direction, and I'm going to increase this 1 loop into 2. So that means I'm going to pull some of my working yarn up and over to make that loop. And then in that same space, I'm going to push some yarn backwards in order to make a pretzel. So now I have 2 stitches in that 1 stitch. Then there are 2 regular stitches in the middle that just each get 1 loop. They each get 1 stitch. And then in the 4th stitch, I need a pretzel again. So I'm going to pull a stitch, and then I'm going to push a stitch backwards in order to get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So someone's asking about the same space part. So right here on this other little practice guide I have, this is 1 stitch. So you want 2 different stitches to come out of this same space. So what that means is I'm going to pull 1 up through this space, and see my fingers holding the spot right here. Through that same place, I'm going to push 1 down. So that's what I mean about putting them into the same space and creating that pretzel, because you're turning this 1 space, this 1 stitch, into 2 stitches by pulling 1 up and pushing 1 back. So hopefully that helps a little bit. All right, on our pattern, we have just increased up to 6. And so then we're going to go from left to right and stitch all 6 of those. So we're just going to pull 1 stitch. And when you're kind of going in the next direction, I like to wrap my yarn around. So I'll have kind of like these little going around spaces each time I start my next line. And I kind of like the way that that finishes. Here we go. My working yarn is going in the direction I'm about to be knitting. And I'm pulling my first stitch through this, and this is kind of wrapping around, and that's great. So I'm not flipping the piece over. I don't flip it over ever again, just at that very beginning in order to get you started. So that was 1. And remember, we're not increasing this time, we're just stitching. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And it will, of course, span out because we are making a heart shape. So you're doing it right. Now we're about to increase from 6 to 8. So all of this in between in my pattern has this dot dot because we're going to keep doing this until we build ourselves up to 12. And once we get to 12, that's going to be the width of our heart. And then we're going to make the other top parts of the heart. So some of you are, I can see, are doing a great job keeping up. So great work. I'm impressed. And some of us are still trying, and that is okay too. Don't give up. It's going to be okay. And one day you're going to be so proud when it finally clicks. All right, I am setting this up and I'm about to go from right to left. So I need to increase the 6 stitches I have into 8, which means my pretzels are only going to be on the outside and the 4 in the middle are just going to get normal stitches. So in this space right here, in this loop, I'm going to pull 1 stitch and I'm going to push 1 stitch. And that has made a pretzel. And turn that 1 stitch into 2. Then I'm going to pull a stitch through each one of these middle 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And in the last space, I'm going to make another pretzel to increase this to 2. So I pull a stitch and I push a stitch. And now I should be up to 8. I want to stitch all 8 of those. So I'm going to pull a loop through each one of those 8. And when I go each time from left to right, my yarn kind of goes underneath the loop and kind of wraps around it on the side when you're starting the next part. So here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And I've stitched all 8 of those. I'm going to go through from right to left and I'm going to increase from 8 up to 10, which means I'm only going to make a pretzel on the outside loops to add 2 more stitches. So I am going to pull 1 loop through and I'm going to push 1 loop through on this side. So here's a new pretzel, increasing it. The 6 in the middle are regular stitches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And the last stitch is going to be another pretzel where we increase this 1 to 2. So pull a stitch and push a stitch. And now we are up to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And we're going to stitch all 10 of those going from left to right. This is the first week of, or the first week. We are in the first month of the new year. So if you are trying this brand new for the first time ever, good work on trying something new and challenging yourself. That is always a good thing to do in a new year. And look at you, you're going to be a hand knitter soon enough. So now I'm going to go from left to right, and I'm going to stitch each one of those 10. So it kind of loops around on the end. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I have 1 more set to increase before we're ready to do the next portion of our heart. So someone was asking in the chat about the yarn. The yarn that I'm using is the Bernat Blanket Big. There's a lot of other options like the Loops and Thread Chanel and some of the other thick, bulky yarns. Definitely you want something that is a jumbo that has a size 7 for the weight of the yarn on it. So there's a couple of different options. This is one that I tend to use a lot because it is just comes in lots of different colors and is very sturdy. The Chanel is awesome and it's super, super soft, but if you're a brand new beginner to hand knitting, it's harder for you to see the stitches when your yarn is so fluffy. So I recommend the Chanel for when you become a little bit more advanced or you've tried it a couple times. But yes, this is 30 grams and it has 32 yards. If you get a smaller skein of yarn, you might need 2 in order to do our heart, but with 32 yards, we're going to have more than enough yarn to do both of the hearts and then stitch them both together. So you are doing great. All right, I am going to build up to 12. So I need to increase right here and right here by adding pretzels, and the 10 in the middle, or the 8 in the middle, are going to stay the same. So here we go. I am increasing which means on this last loop over here, I'm going to pull up 1 stitch and I'm going to push back 1 stitch. And that has increased to 2. Then I have all my regular stitches. And there's 8 of those stitches in the middle. And then at the end, I'm going to increase this by doing a pretzel. So pull 1 and push 1 through that last stitch. And now we should be up to our 12 stitches, which is going to be the width of our heart pillow. So we are making really good progress. And in our pattern, we have increased to 12. That's what we just did. Now we're going to stitch from left to right. We're going to stitch those 12 in, and we're going to stitch one more time going back the other direction. So we're going to give ourselves 2 rows of 12 stitches instead of just 1. So I'm going to put my working yarn kind of going in the direction that I'm about to be going in. And I'm going to start pulling stitches. It wraps around a little bit, and that's just fine. That's how it's supposed to go. And I'm going to pull 1 stitch through each one of these loops, and I should be at 12. Yay, I'm at the right number, and I hope you are too. Awesome. Someone just put in the chat that this yarn also comes in a 600 gram instead of a 300 gram. So imagine how fluffy that heart pillow would be. That could be even more awesome. So that sounds like a fun plan to try with that too. I am up to 12. I have stitched going from left to right, but remember our pattern said at the very end to go ahead and stitch 12 again, going from right to left. So I'm going to stitch those 12 one more time, going from right to left. No increases this time. Now we're on the second page of our pattern, and we're about to start making the round parts of the heart now that we've kind of built up this shape. So on the next page of the pattern, I highlighted this portion of the heart because we're about to just focus on the left-hand side of the heart, and then we're going to come back and focus on the right-hand side of the heart. So we're going to break this next part into kind of 2 sections. So I am ready to go from left to right. And my first direction says to go ahead and stitch just 6 of them. So I have 12 stitches, but I'm just going to stitch 6. So I'm putting my working yarn going in the direction from left to right. And I'm going to pull 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And someone asked about on the other side of the pattern, these dots in between means you're going to keep repeating that increase stitch, increase stitch, increase stitch until you get to 12 stitches. So you increase by 2 each time, and you do that several times until you get to 12. And when you get to your 12, you increase to 12, then you stitch 12, and then you're right back where we are now stitching 6. So we're halfway through our pillow. We're not stitching on the right-hand side, just the left-hand side. And then the next step is a new step that we're learning, and this is going to say decrease to 5. So decreasing is not very hard in hand knitting. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and we're about to change these 6 stitches into just 5 stitches. And what we do is we take this stitch, the 6th one, and literally put it on top of the 5th stitch. And instead of pulling 1 loop through each one of these, we're going to put them on top of each other and pull 1 stitch. And basically what we just did was combine those 2 down to just 1. So that's how you decrease. So in order to decrease, when you're done making your 6 loops, you put this loop on top of this loop, and then you pull a stitch through both of them, and that's the decrease. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've gone from 6 down to just 5. And on our pattern, it says now we're going to go from left to right, and we're going to decrease down to 4. So the way we're going to turn these 5 stitches into 4 is by stacking this loop on top of this loop and pulling through both of them at the same time. So now we're going to go from left to right, and we're going to decrease by stacking the last loop on top of the second loop and pulling a stitch through both of those loops, and that has the decrease. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I bet you can already start to see the heart that we're making, and it's looking pretty good. So if your stitches are very loose, you're welcome to try again. We're about to do the second heart and kind of put them together. You're welcome to try again and start over, or just keep going with what you have just to be able to do it one whole time. And then the next time you do it, it's going to be a lot better. All right, we're down to 4. In our directions, the next step says to decrease to 3. So that means I'm going to put this loop on top of this loop, and I'm going to pull a stitch through. 1, 2, 3. And Sherry, you might want to also be careful when you're doing your stitches to make sure you don't have a lot of extra. Maybe your stitches are getting loose because you might have a lot of extra yarn kind of hiding underneath your project. And when you pull a loop through, that extra yarn might be messing you up and making some of your stitches too big or bigger than you mean them to be. So maybe check that out too. We've decreased down to 3. And in our directions now, we're going to decrease down to 2, going from left to right. So you stack this loop on top of this loop, and you have 1, 2. The directions say to decrease down to 1, so going from right to left. So put this loop on top of this loop and pull one through. And now I just have this one remaining loop. I'm going to leave probably about 10 inches of yarn because this is some yarn that I'm going to use for sewing later. And I'm going to go ahead and cut this off of my skein. And with this last loop, this is where I'm going to kind of secure my end. So I cut off a tail. It's probably about 10 inches, this extra tail of yarn. And then I'm going to put this tail through this last loop. And when I pull that nice and tight, it's going to kind of knot this off and secure that. And I'm going to leave this tail because I'm going to come back and use that later. So when you're at the very end and you have that last loop, just go ahead and push your tail through that last loop and pull it gently and tightly because this can snap. The yarn can snap, so be careful. Then you're going to be good. So there's another in the chat that says, by any chance, would this be more helpful using a large crochet hook or a large crochet? I think that's what you mean. So yes, if you know how to do this with hooks, with knitting, I think that's great. But I love the fact that I don't need any tools for this. That's kind of one of my favorite things, is that it doesn't take a lot of materials to just get going. So you might have just seen me kind of fluff the top to make it a little bit rounder. So since I pulled that last stitch and kind of made it a little pointy, I'm just kind of like fluffing this up at the top. I love the way that this finishes with these really pretty knit stitches all the way around. It looks really good. And what's nice about us keeping the pretzels on the outside is that look at all these really beautiful knit stitches in the middle. It just looks really sharp. It looks really good. So we didn't do the increasing in the middle because we wanted to keep those really nice rows and ridges. And I think it looks awesome. We are almost done with our very first heart. So now we're about to do the right-hand side of the heart. And we're going to kind of do what we just did, but obviously we're going in the other direction to fill in the space on the right. So the way that you start this might feel a little concerning at first, but I promise you it's going to work. All right. So, did that. When you're starting on this right-hand side, you take the tail of your skein, and I'm going to leave myself again, probably like 10 inches or so. And then to start this, there's no knots, there's nothing funky going on. To start this side, you just pull up a loop. And that might feel concerning, like, isn't that going to fall out? That feels kind of weird. But this honestly is similar to what you start with crochet. It will be secure when we do our other stuff, and we will use this and tie this into other things. But for now, just to start this portion up here, go ahead and lay your working yarn down, leave about 10 inches on the right-hand side for a tail, and pull one loop through. And going from right to left, our first instruction is to stitch 6. So I pulled 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. And then, just like we did before, we're going to start some decreasing. So going from left to right, we're going to decrease down to 5, which means I'm going to take this first stitch, stack it on top of the second stitch, and I'm going to pull a loop through both of them at the same time, which is going to decrease. So what I was saying to Sherry before too is right here, when you do this decrease, if I just pull the yarn up, do you see how that has extra yarn right here, and it's going to make my stitch too long and kind of too loose? So I'm making sure that it's kind of close and tight to where I am instead of having some of that excess laying to the side. I'm pulling up this decrease, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. I'm decreasing down to 4. So I'm putting this stitch on top of the stitch next to it and pulling through both of them. 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm decreasing to 3, going from left to right. So stacking this stitch on top of this stitch. 1, 2, 3. I am decreasing down to 2. So stacking this stitch on top of this stitch. 1, 2, and I'm decreasing to 1. Stacking this stitch on top of this stitch and pulling one last loop through. And just like we did before, I'm going to cut a tail from my skein of yarn. And I'm going to take that tail and I'm going to go through the last loop where I just left off. And I'm going to pull gently but tightly in order to secure this end. And we have our first heart. How are we doing? Are you doing okay-ish? Some of us are like, yay! And some of, oh yes, we are getting it. This is looking good. Okay, you're gonna have this success. So if you're not there yet, do not give up. You can watch this video again, and I will show you a little bit more of the heart one more time. So what's gonna happen now is a little bit of movie magic. So we are going to do this whole entire process one more time because we need 2 hearts. And then we're going to seam or sew these 2 hearts together. And what I mean by sew is really just looping yarn around and connecting them to each other. And we're going to stuff them, and that's how we make our pillow. So we do still have about 20 minutes together. So I don't know if we'll be able to make both hearts, which is why I'm kind of doing a little bit of movie magic right now. But I'm going to show you this part, and then we can go back, and if we have some more time, I'll help everybody start their second heart and kind of get you started on that. So if anyone's still stuck on the pretzel or still stuck at the beginning, we can watch this again and kind of check it out. So there's a Michael's YouTube channel. So if you go to YouTube and you search Michael's, you'll find our whole channel that has lots of these online classes we've done and recorded. And then you'll be able to go back through and find this probably in about 2 hours. This one will definitely be up by then. And then you'll be able to see that video and watch it again and be able to follow along. Let's see. I think there is another question I wanted to answer. I think that's it for now. Okay, so we just made this heart together. We increased up to 12. We did our 12. We did the left-hand side. We did the right-hand side. We tied them both off. What I want to show you is that on this side right here are what we call the knit stitches. So in regular knitting, this little stitch that kind of looks like a letter V is a knit stitch. And if you flip your pillow over, you're going to see a very different look. These going horizontally are what we call purl stitches. So in knitting, we use knit stitches and purls, and we kind of combine them both together in order to give you some really fun and interesting looks. So we're going to be having the knit stitches face up because I really like the ridges. If you are in love with your purl side and you'd rather your heart have this, or maybe one side look like this and one side look like the other, you can do that. But because I am going to have my knit stitches showing, I'm going to put my knit heart against my knit heart. So I have my good side to my good side, and I'm stacking them up. And I'm going to show you how you will eventually sew both of these together. So we left a lot of tails all over the place, and those tails are going to help us connect these two together in order to make our pillow. I'm going to do a little bit of sewing, then we're going to turn it inside out, we're going to stuff it, and we're going to finish it off. So that's what we're about to do. So at the bottom, these are two really good opportunities here to connect the pillows together just by tying a square knot. So this yarn can break if you're kind of pulling too hard. So kind of pull toughly but gently. I'm going to do another knot.
Hey Megan,
Yes.
I was going back through the comments and I was wondering, was you looking at the question from Laura? She was asking, did you go through from the front to the back? I think she was asking towards the end.
Did I go through from the front? I'm not sure. So Laura, if you're still with me, try and ask that question again so I can help you because I'm not quite sure what part you're talking about. But thanks, Felicia.
You're
So
welcome.
I just tied this knot. And then I'm going to go to the next part where I have some extra strings. So here at the top, I have the remaining tails from both of these. And these are both in the same place. So I'm going to tie a nice square knot right here. Should you go through that last loop front to back? Oh, okay. So when you're tying it off, the question was if you're tying it off, should you pull the yarn coming up or should you pull it going back? Honestly, it's not going to matter that much, but I did pull it up so that I have this last stitch kind of sitting nicely. So I pulled it up, but great question. And thank you for the assist. Okay, I have these two tails up here, and I'm going to tie these together using a square knot. Fabulous. And now that I have these anchor spots, I got the two on the top of the hearts and I have the one on the bottom. I am going to go ahead and switch this inside out to do the rest of my connecting. So now both of my good sides are on the outside. And I'm going to take any of these remaining tails and I'm going to use these in order to sew the two layers together. So what that means is I'm going to take the tail and I'm going to put it through a stitch on the top heart and I'm going to put it through a stitch on the bottom heart. And it's kind of like a whip stitch if you've ever heard of that or done that in embroidery or sewing. So I'm going to go in through the top and out through the bottom. And I'm going to start kind of lining these two pillows up and connecting them by going through. And when you start to run out of yarn, then you just go ahead and tie off a knot. And all of these knots and all of these extra tails are going to very easily be hidden That is the beauty of this chunky yarn. You probably can't even see that knot I just tied because it hides in with all the rest of the chunkiness. And then you can take another one of the tails and I sandwich the two pillows together. And I make sure that I go through one of the stitches on the top of the pillow and one of the stitches on the bottom heart. And then I kind of whip around and go through another top and another bottom and go as far as my yarn will take me until I get towards the end. And then just like I did at the top of the pillow, I'm kind of tying off a knot. And then I'm stuffing some extra tail inside, sandwiched in between the two pillows. Now, when you run out of tail, you have plenty more yarn on your skein. So I'm going to cut, I don't know, this is probably about like a wingspan of yarn. So if I stretch both of my arms out, it's probably going to be about that much. And then I'm going to go into one of these spots. And so here, I'm going to stitch these together by just taking this long tail and kind of tying a knot. And again, these knots are pretty easy to hide, so feel free to tie as many as you feel secure with. And now that I've kind of attached this new threading yarn together, then I'm going to go ahead and start sandwiching the hearts together and going through both of these like a whip stitch. So I'm threading that through. And I'm going to keep going through both layers of the heart and seam all the way down the side. Of course, before you go crazy with all your seaming, make sure that you leave enough space for you to start putting in your polyfill to make it the pillow. And I am very excited. I think a lot of you today, remember I told you at the beginning that this whole pillow probably takes about an hour and a half. And you and I only have an hour together right now. So that's why I had to do a little bit of movie magic and kind of skip ahead. But your next step is going to be to make your second heart. And then once you have your second heart, you're going to be able to sew them together like I'm doing right now. Stuff it with your polyfill. And then you are also going to have a completed project. Now, we have an Instagram on Michael's called Learn with Michael's, and it's all about all of our classes, all of our online classes and different workshops and things that we're doing. So we would love for you to follow us at Learn with Michael's, and even more so, if anyone finishes their pillow today, please, please, please tag us. Take a picture on Instagram, tag us at Learn with Michael's, and we will reshare it and show everybody the beautiful pillow that you were able to make today. So if this is your first pillow, I would be very proud of myself. And those of you that are still like, but what about me? We're going to get this video to you and you're going to make a pillow too. And then whenever you get a pillow done, feel free to post it and tag us at Learn with Michael's, and we will be very proud of you. And we will hang it on our refrigerator, which is basically Instagram. So we will show you that we are proud of you and we will reshare it. Yay. And I see, and some of you that have your cameras on, some really nice looking pillows starting to shape up. So some of you might be using the pattern to get started on your second heart. And then once you have both of the hearts, I'm going to use some of this extra tail to secure this in. Oh yeah, Felicia just put into the chat a different class that I've taught before. And that class is a patterned hand knit blanket. So remember how I talked about knit stitches and purl stitches? So if you combine knit stitches and purl stitches together, you can make a really beautiful textured blanket or patterned blanket like this. So that class is already available on YouTube. So you don't even have to wait. You can go and check that one out. I'm going to go ahead and use some polyfill and stuff my pillow. And if the heart feels too much for you, believe it or not, the hand knit blankets are much easier than the heart. So if you're feeling defeated by the heart, you can try a blanket and you very well may have a lot of success on the blanket because it's flat and there's not really a pattern. It's just the same thing over and over again. And if you start to become obsessed with hand knitting, like some might say I am, then I've created a couple of other hand knit patterns, and those videos are also already available. Felicia's sharing them in the chat. This one is a bunny. So I know it's kind of hard to see, but we made a little pom-pom. We had these floppy ears and we made a little bunny pillow. And we've also done one where instead of being a heart shape, it's a flower shape and it's another kind of pillow. So if you found this success and you feel good about this, try some of those other ones. I bet you'll be able to get those too. So I'm taking the polyfill and I am deciding kind of how fluffy I want my pillow to be and adding in that polyfill. And then I only have one more section left in order to seam this up. This is my last bit I have left. And then I'm going to have a beautiful heart-shaped pillow. So I think I'm going to cut myself another little bit of length of yarn to help. Good, I'm glad. Once you kind of understand what the point is or why we're doing certain things, like what in the world does she mean by pretzel, once you start kind of decoding that for yourself, I think you're going to find a lot of success.
Hey, Megan, there's a question asking, have you ever had issues with the polyfill coming out through the stitches?
Great question. So, um, it can, like you might be able to see some of the white. And so if I made my stitches even tighter, you would have even less polyfill showing. There are also some heart forms, some pillows that are shaped like a heart already. So you could put one of those actual pillows inside and then you definitely won't have any problem with any stuffing coming out. But I think however tight you can make your stitches is going to help if you care and if you really don't want to see that extra white. But I think for the most part, it tends to do pretty well and stays where it's supposed to. So we can't necessarily send the link to this class, but it will appear on the YouTube channel. And if you do have Instagram, I will post it with a link there too. So you can try that.
Hey, Megan, let me add an extra comment.
Okay.
If you go onto YouTube and actually follow the Michaels channel, you will receive notification and actually select for you to receive notifications. You will receive a notification when that class has been added to the channel.
That's a good point. Yeah, go ahead and subscribe so you know when the new stuff's coming, and especially this pillow. And also, if you weren't able to get the pattern from the link during the class time, this pattern will also be attached to the YouTube video. So someone asked a great question. Can you use this to make a scarf or a cowl? Absolutely. So these same hand knit stitches, if you just keep going in a row and keep going rows and rows and rows, you can definitely make a pretty chunky scarf. And if you attach the two sides together, you can make kind of like an infinity loop scarf, which is what we call a cowl. So yeah, absolutely, go for it. Show us what you do. I want to see it. I'm moving my stuffing around, kind of making this nicer. And I am just tying a knot at the end. And maybe go through another stitch and tie one more knot just to kind of keep it secure. And then I recommend, rather than cutting and trimming with any of your extra loose ends, I recommend just pushing them through to the inside of the pillow. If you try to cut them and you come too close to the knot, sometimes the knot starts to undo itself. So any of these extra pieces that are kind of flying around, just go ahead and stuff them to the inside of the heart. I've also had times where when I finished my heart pillow, I had more than enough of my purple yarn left that instead of using so much polyfill, I used some of the extra yarn itself. And then that might also help you keep from getting some of the polyfill peeking through. So if you use some of the color you already used in order to fill the rest of your heart pillow, that might also help with that problem. So what happens if our tails are not long enough to stitch around the whole form? Your tails will probably not be long enough to stitch around the whole form. So you just cut yourself an extra length, probably about a wingspan. So maybe like 4 feet or something like that. And just take one of these and start weaving it through like a big needle and thread, and then just tie it off. So you don't have to just use the tails to stitch all the way around, but the tails are there, so you might as well use them to your advantage too. I definitely tie the tails together in those 3 spots, and then from there I keep going. So we are just about at the end. We have about 2 more minutes. I finished this with a little bit of help from my movie magic, making a second heart. But those of you who were following along, your next step is someone just said you have to come up with a candy cane pillow. Oh my goodness. That sounds like a challenge, and that sounds like a challenge that I am up for. So yes, that sounds like a great idea. How fun. So yes, a new hobby has been unlocked for you. I hope that you really enjoy this hand knitting. Um, Go ahead and download this pattern or save this pattern. This pattern is still on my 4M Coleman Instagram, so I'll make sure that that gets to the forefront too. If you check that out, you'll be able to find it. But Felicia, you can go ahead and switch me back to the beginning. And I just want to congratulate those of you who have been following along and were able to make your first chunky knit pillow. They're so fun. They're such a great gift. They don't cost a ton of money. There are not a lot of supplies. So with a little bit of practice, a little bit of grace for yourself for sure, just kind of getting used to the whole thing, you too can make your very own hand knit pillow.
Hey,
So I'm,
Megan,
yeah, go for it.
there is a last minute question just asking as far as care. What would be your suggestion as far as washing it?
Great question. So if you put the polyfill in, you're not going to want to wash it with the polyfill in because it's going to get chunky and it's going to get weird. But on the Bernat Blanket Big um, skein, when you first buy it, they always have washing and care instructions. So they will tell you if you should wash it in cold, if you can wash it in the machine, different things like that. So whatever the care is for the yarn that you're using, whatever they suggest, this one says care on the reverse side, says machine washing and drying, wash in water, and on a delicate setting, don't bleach, tumble dry at a low heat. So whatever the yarn allows for, your pillow will allow for too. Just make sure that you might want to take out the form or take out some of the polyfill if you are going to wash it, or just leave it somewhere flat to dry in order to get you a new fresh pillow also.
And
So
really
thank
quick,
you, everyone.
last
Sure,
question, really quick. How much polyfill did you put in?
great question. I put I think about 6 handfuls. So if you buy the bag that we suggested in the shopping list for today, you're going to have more than enough. Um, I don't know what that is in ounces. I think the bag that we suggested, I don't remember how many ounces were in that bag, but you're not going to even need the whole bag. So what do you do when the polyfill becomes flat? Great question. You can take the polyfill out and you can replace it. Or like I said, if you want to encase this more in a like actual pillow form. So if you want to use a feather pillow in a heart shape and put it in here before you stitch it up, you can do that too. You can kind of, since we tucked all our ends in, we didn't cut them off. You can theoretically pull some of these tails back out and reopen your pillow if you need to take some of the polyfill out or put some new polyfill back in. You should be able to still do that. Thank you, Felicia, for adding that. The 20-ounce polyester washable hypoallergenic polyfill is what I was using. And so if it's a 20-ounce bag, you don't even need 20 ounces. I would probably guess about 8 to 10 ounces. But that's really a guess. So, all right. I've had a great time. I hope you did too. And tag us at Learn with Michael so we can see your heart shaped knit pillows. Bye, everyone.